Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his wife Olena have attended a funeral for the victims of a helicopter crash that killed the country's interior minister earlier this week. The aircraft carrying Denis Monastyrsky and other top officials came down in a Kyiv suburb. Over a dozen people were killed, including a child, in the accident.
They are remembered as heroes who sacrificed their lives for their country, but also as a daughter, son, and father. Ukraine is honoring the leading figures of its interior ministry killed in the helicopter crash. The coffins are wrapped in the Ukrainian flag, and President Volodymyr Zelensky offered his condolences to the families. The cause of the crash that killed 14 people is still being investigated. Ukraine says it's losing its people on the front lines too, and it desperately needs the world's support as its soldiers fight Russian forces. Kyiv says it's disappointed that its Western allies were indecisive on sending heavy-duty modern tanks such as German-made Leopards to Ukraine. Many of the soldiers near the city of Bakhmut believe modern tanks can help them.
This one is such a basic tank, just a simple rocket launcher, which was made a long time ago. But in capable hands, it can be a really serious threat. It's a great motivation for the infantry. When we have the tanks, their morale gets high, and they feel less fear. When we start storming with Leopards or Challengers or other more modern tanks, we would be unstoppable.
Ukraine's impassioned appeal comes as Russia has intensified its fighting in Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia region.
Near Zaporizhzhia, the offensive operations have given Eastern Military District units better positions.
Ukraine says heavy tanks are essential to defend an expected Russian offensive in the spring. It believes any delay means more Ukrainian blood will be shed and more of its land taken.
All right, well, for more on this, let's bring in Dr. Marina Midon from the Defence Studies Department at King's College in London. Welcome to DW. So, as we heard in the report, skirmishes in the Zaporizhzhia region are intensifying again after months of relative calm. Could this be the beginning of a new large-scale Russian assault?
Well, we've heard some movement around Zaporizhzhia, and essentially because the Ukrainian forces have redeployed their troops to the area of Bakhmut, there is a possibility that the Russians might want to exploit this weakness in defense and attack, or that might be a maneuver to lure forces back to Zaporizhzhia and attack somewhere else. So it's right now, it's difficult to judge what is going to happen, but the Russian sources have also pointed out that with the appointment of General Gerasimov, they will be preparing for a large counteroffensive.
Well, tell us about that, because intelligence does suggest that Russia is reorganising for a new major offensive in the spring. Would these tanks most likely help fend off such an assault, or could they actually really get the Ukrainians moving forward again?
The problem is, of course, tanks can be used defensively in a variety of ways, probably not the best weapon to use in urban settings. However, what we don't know is if the decision is taken to deploy those tanks to Ukraine, when will they reach Ukraine and what number will reach Ukraine, meaning that the Ukrainian forces will have to carefully think about the placement of those tanks. And because we don't know exactly where the Russians will attack, that will depend on the Ukrainian intelligence to find out exactly where the enemy might be striking them in order to prepare their defenses accordingly and be able to conduct a counterattack. But again, this depends on so many factors, and as of today, it is probably unrealistic to expect the tanks to reach Ukraine in spring. Sometimes mid-spring might be a possibility, but we just don't know.
Tell us this. President Zelensky maintains that there's, quote, no other alternative but for the West to give Ukraine heavy tanks. So does he basically mean that they simply can't hold off the Russian forces without them?
Well, obviously, because the tanks that Ukraine has are so outdated and they don't have a lot of them left, assuming that Russians will be using tanks for an attack, it would certainly benefit Ukraine to be able to have tanks to reinforce their defensive positions. And they could be used in several ways as a part of mechanized infantry, for instance, with armored support. And those new tanks might be also superior to what Russia is using, so it would definitely give them an edge. However, it's difficult to judge whether they will be able to hold the Russian offensive because we don't know what Russia will be using to launch that offensive,
right.
And how concentrated the troops will be.
Thank you, Dr. Marina Miron from King's College London.
Thank you.